How's it going, everybody? My name is Cam White, and welcome back to your favorite weekly horoscope, this time for January 11th through January 17th of 2021. It's still weird saying that. However, clearly we came off of a very crazy last week. I don't feel like anything that happened last week was all too surprising, looking at everything, but I just also want to reiterate, because I can't be clear enough on this type of stuff, like the QAnon people, since I know there's a lot of QAnon people in the spiritual community. Unfollow me. I don't want to deal with any of your guys' bullshit. It's absolutely insane how far that QAnon stuff goes. Same thing with the Trump supporters. If you can have all political views, I don't care what political views you are, but the Trump stuff is absolutely insane. It's absolutely insane. So get the fuck off my channel again. I just want to reiterate. I already said that earlier this year, but I also want to talk about the astrology of last week. It was, again, not as surprising, also given the circumstances, it wasn't all that surprising, but that's not the end of it. We still have another 2 weeks of craziness to go, and this week is just, another piece of the puzzle. This week and next week are crazy. Luckily, we got a couple of things going on this week that, I'm going to get into, like the Mercury retrograde, or Mercury is going into shadow this week, and I want to just talk about how this is really just as ugly as it gets. February looks a lot better, but again, we're not done with all of the complications yet. So let's go ahead and jump straight into it. There we go. Oh, no? Do I have the right button? Oh, there we go. Anyway, let's start off on Monday. We have the moon going into Capricorn. Monday looks great, by the way. I'm thinking about doing something with this. I'm not even sure what I want to do. But the moon's going to literally go into Capricorn, immediately make that trine to Mars, and conjoin Venus. This is looking really solid. This is looking like, if you're really wanting to implement some new plans, Venus in Capricorn, I feel like is really, a lot of bad things just got done in Capricorn. So we're kind of, Venus coming in is kind of sprucing the place up a little bit. It's kind of like, cleaning up a murder scene. Just throw some bleach on the tile and it's like nothing ever happened. The moon coming in and conjoining Venus there, this is a time of being practical, applying yourself. Venus being about reward. There's a reward when we, implement systems. There's a reward when we have some type of structure. There's a reward. There's a gain when it comes to playing by the rules, having some type of structure, right? That's that Venus and Capricorn stuff we talked about last week. And as Venus is now separating from Mars, which, yeah, they have some reception there. But the moon, first making that trine to Mars, then conjoining Venus is like this. There's not a motivation to get things done very fast, right? Mars is in Taurus right now. We just got off of Mars being in Aries for 6 months, so it's not like we're really wanting to, sure, the maybe the ambition might be there, but I think maybe the energy to, kickstart and be very explosive with energy, just that's long gone. And this Mars and Taurus stuff is much more, again, it's so much more about keeping that momentum. Whatever momentum you got earlier with Mars and Aries, that's what you got. If we kind of reverse and go back to the analogy that I was making over the summer, or over this fall, I should say, it's like that little engine that could. We, went up the hill, then we had to go back down the hill, and then we went up it again. And now that we're on the other side, now we're kind of going down. And I feel like, we're going down, we're going up, basically carrying our momentum along the way. This week, we will have some issues with that momentum. However, on Monday, as we start the week off, I think the moon conjoining Venus, making that trine to Mars, this is a lot of comfortability. This is a lot of, sticking to the plan, having a system, having some type, the biggest thing is just having a plan, even if it's just with your everyday stuff. Moon in Capricorn, Venus in Capricorn, making things look neat, making things look professional. Mars in Taurus, do what you can while you can, you know what I mean? The one thing also to look at here is that this is also, on Monday, we have Mercury conjoining Jupiter, which Mercury and Jupiter on the surface is good. I think I don't want to hold our breaths and like, oh, this is going to be amazing. But, Mercury is that megaphone. Jupiter is in a new sign now. And, one thing I wanted to bring up was when Saturn and Mars went into Aquarius last time, that was like during Pisces season and Aries season. So this is going to be our first go around of Saturn and Aquarius with your typical Aquarius transits, the Sun, Moon, Mercury, and Venus. So as Mercury's now in Aquarius, Jupiter's now in Aquarius, Mercury conjoining Jupiter, that's kind of like, the trumpets are kind of sounding off for what Jupiter in Aquarius is going to be like. I think this is really good in terms of, I'm speaking from definitely an American standpoint. I think there's going to be some good news with things kind of, hey, what does moving forward look like? What are new ways or new systems that we can go about things? Again, this is Aquarius. It's still serious. There still needs to be a plan. It's still Saturnian, but there's a greater room to work with here. Jupiter's also not in its sign of fall anymore. Jupiter doesn't necessarily have an amazing dignity, but Jupiter in Aquarius is like, hey, here's your options. Here's what you can do in the meantime. And I feel like Mercury conjoining Jupiter is make of it what while you have it, or I don't know if I'm saying that right. Make do with what you have, almost in a sense. Now, as we go into Tuesday, we will then have the new moon in Capricorn. Notice that it's at about 23 degrees Capricorn. So, of course, this was where we had that Saturn-Pluto conjunction earlier this year. Also on this new moon in Capricorn day, this is also exactly when Mars squares Saturn. Mars squaring Saturn won't happen until late Tuesday night, early into Wednesday morning. And to be honest with you, I think Monday we get a nice happy step. You know what I mean? Like not a big deal, but Tuesday kind of doesn't look like shitty, but like if you've ever dealt with grief before, especially, I mean, like honestly, with how many people are dead, we probably all have a little bit of grief that we dealt with this past year. I feel like Tuesday is going to be one of those moments where it's like, it all kind of like sits in, right? Or sets in. The sun, it's a new moon in Capricorn where I'd usually say, I shouldn't say I usually would say, because I will double down on that, the new moon in Capricorn, both the luminaries are focused in one space, right? So our attention's focused somewhere. The energy's kind of balancing itself out, kind of evening itself out. And then the sign of Capricorn about structures, systems, routines, any type of, I always like to say, out of all of the earth signs, Taurus is like soil, and like Virgo is so much like plant material, right? It's so adaptable, so changeable. But Capricorn is like concrete, and I feel like we all kind of maybe say the Capricorn's concrete thing, like because of walls and whatnot. But one thing I really like to bring up with the concrete stuff is like, in order to make concrete, what you actually have to do is heat up limestone. So, and I think that also emphasizes on Mars being the exaltation ruler of Capricorn, where there's this heat that's applied to literal solid rock, and what this does is create the cement. It creates the glue in order that holds things together, right? So this new moon in Capricorn is kind of like, I don't want to say re-gluing things, but kind of like, hey, are things still operating at the pace that we need them to? This is kind of like your what do they call this? Like your checkup. It's it's like going to your doctor. Is everything functioning properly? Is everything working well? Except, this is like your normal everyday checkup after you just had like a giant battle with cancer. Like, this new moon in Capricorn, you got to think the last time the new moon in Capricorn. Do you guys remember the last time we were here? That was the Christmas eclipse that we had. That was basically the start of COVID. And I think a lot of this new moon in Capricorn is very like kind of settling with the fact of like what we just kind of all went through, and how much everything is still changing. And I want to also emphasize on the fact that, it is kind of like this grief of like, hey, let's kind of let's go over everything we went through. Because also Mars is squaring Saturn. This isn't a big day of moving forward. That Mars, again, I would say that Mars in Taurus momentum, that's great and all, but Mars squaring Saturn, there's this like it's like you have all this momentum. It's like you're in a fight with someone and you go to punch and you miss them. It's like you throw all of this force into something just to completely miss. And if you guys have ever been in fights or anything like that, like how like when you hyperextend yourself, right? It could hurt. It totally throws you off your game. Mars squaring Saturn during this new moon in Capricorn is like, what needs to stop for one. I think that's a really good, clever way of looking at it, because this new moon is literally ruled by Mars and Saturn if we're looking at the sign of Capricorn, and Mars and Saturn are squaring each other. So I think this is a good way to look at like, hey, like what needs to stop? Like what seriously needs to get just thrown out in the trash? What didn't get left behind, with the Saturn Pluto stuff? Going back to the hoarders analogy I love to make, this is, kind of like, oh, let me just hide some stuff over here in the corner that, I can just keep to my side. I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's going to fly. I really think that this is definitely, like, this new moon in Capricorn is like, hey, if it doesn't work anymore, like, stop it. Like, Mars is in detriment squaring Saturn in its superior position. Like, you are not going to, if you are trying to keep this momentum going and you still got hundreds of pounds of weights on your back, like, that momentum is going to be much more harder to carry versus when you don't have anything on your back, when you don't have anything weighing you down, right? So I don't want to say that this new moon's bad. I don't think it's horrible, but I think it's definitely going to be like, hey, if you've been driving with the check engine light on, this is the day that your car doesn't start no more. If you've been, doing stuff in a way that doesn't work, this is going to be the day where you realize it's time to move on from something. It's time that system like collapses and that we got to integrate something new. So I do think that this new moon in Capricorn is, we could look at that from a positive sense, in my opinion. We could look at that from a constructive sense. If we also look at the fact that Mercury is going to be squaring Uranus earlier in the day too, this isn't, I don't want to say, well, to be honest with you, I feel like none of this shit is shocking, but I've also been watching this astrology and knowing that these transits were going to happen for a while now, so it might be shocking to a lot of other people, but Mercury squaring Uranus is like, that message that you put out. Well, let me kind of back up here too with the whole Mercury and Aquarius thing. Mercury's going to go retrograde here, and we're going to talk about that almost next. We'll get there. But the way I've been trying to explain this whole Aquarius stuff moving in, squaring Uranus, is like, we're going to try to be implementing a whole bunch of new shit that our infrastructure isn't necessarily ready for. Like, we're not going to be ready to make all of these changes and, turn everything fast. Like, it's kind of like when COVID hit and everyone had work from home. Before then, no one knew what Zoom was. And, it was funny, like, watching the beginning of it, everyone was just doing it off their home cameras. Now everyone's got, like, their whole, like, a whole setup of, like, in-home office Zoom stuff. Mercury squaring Uranus on Tuesday, I think there's, again, that the message that you have to say isn't really received well, especially if you're not really confident in saying it. And I think Mercury in Aquarius squaring Uranus, it's like, no matter how you put that message, it's not going to come off well. It's not going to be well received. Again, Mars is also squaring Saturn here, so there's a wall that's being hit, and there's a new moon in Capricorn here. There's a emphasis on there is a problem. Not to say that Capricorn is just an issue, but like, again, this is happening in that kind of sensitive degree where a lot of bullshit just kind of happened. We need to really look at, have you changed your oil in the past 3,000 miles? Do you need new tires? Are your brakes worn out? This new moon in Capricorn is literally just that checkup, and it's ruled by Mars and Saturn. It's definitely like, it's time to go get your oil changed, essentially. But Mercury squaring Uranus, again, it's not going to be fun getting that news. If you have been ignoring your engine and your car, and probably because it's too expensive or you're, too afraid of, having to investigate it, that news, when you end up having to address it, isn't going to be fun. And I kind of think that's what Tuesday is. And so, I think the day of Tuesday, we're going to be like, Tuesday sucks. But then in hindsight, we're going to be like, we're so glad Tuesday happened. It needed to happen, because that's how usually life goes. Anyway, we get into Wednesday, and Wednesday we got a grip of shit going on. So hold on, just let me name it off here. The moon goes into Aquarius after this new moon in Capricorn, right? It will immediately square Mars and Uranus. It will immediately conjoin Saturn, and then conjoin Jupiter, and then conjoin Mercury. It'll actually technically conjoin Mercury later on Thursday night, but anyway, the moon gets off this new moon, right? Immediately conjoins Saturn, squares Mars, squares Uranus, conjoins Jupiter, doing the whole, pinball thing. And so this is where I think the moon is, okay, the new moon in Capricorn, right? We realize what the problems were. We realize what we got to change. And then the moon goes into Aquarius. It's like, oh, it conjoins Saturn. Sweet, we're taking responsibility. And then then the moon squares Mars. It's like, oh, fuck, this is a lot harder than I thought. And then the moon conjoins Jupiter. It's like, oh, there's hope if we learn the lesson. And then it's like moon squares Uranus, where it's like, well, you can't always expect the unexpected, and there's going to be problems and pitfalls that are out of your control. And so I think Wednesday's going to be a very emotionally distraught day, just kind of all over the place. 1 second it's over there. I mean, the moon's literally just doing that all day long. The moon usually has a little bit of time before it transits, but it's literally back to back within the matter of like 6 hours. So, Wednesday, I feel like after this new moon in Capricorn, we're going to feel like we want to get the ball rolling. Like, all right, let's, we have pinpointed the problem. Let's start addressing a solution. I know that's kind of rare to say that we might actually be addressing a solution, but that might be a thing. The other thing that we've got going on is Venus trines Uranus, which again, I think with Venus in Capricorn, I think this is going to be, I kind of talked about this the last time Venus trined Uranus, and this was when Venus was in Virgo, is like, you might see like some new tech or some new fashion wear come out with this COVID stuff. But I think also Venus in Capricorn trining Uranus, we can have a lot of creative and innovative ways to reward ourselves. And also, planning that reward. Venus and Capricorn too, like knowing that like it takes a certain amount of steps to get to, to go and collecting $200, right? It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And I think I think Venus and Capricorn trining Uranus is, we can find innovative and creative ways to reward ourselves, to make a system or to make a game, easier to, I don't want to say easier to reward, but easier to enjoy. Venus and Capricorn, again, like it's time to spruce up. Let's we can't just do hard work and then like expect it to be amazing, but we can make work fun, like you can sing along while you're working or dance while you're working. I mean, unless you're really boring. And I feel like Venus and Capricorn is like, well, if you're going to have a hardcore system, it's like, on a hardcore diet, it's like you got to have a cheat day. You got to have some type of reward that gets you to the next thing. And I feel like that's what a lot of Venus and Capricorn really is. So Venus trines Uranus, I think we can find innovative and creative ways to do that. And also just being spontaneous too with rewards. But then also, I really wanted to bring up how the Sun conjoins Pluto on Wednesday, because I think this is the peak fear when it comes to like, there's a lot of uncertainty right now, like especially here in America. Like, I don't know, just even watching all that stuff happen in DC was just kind of just mind-boggling. But the Sun conjoining Pluto, one, I think this is going to stoke a lot of anxieties and fear. That's just what Pluto does. I think the Sun conjoining Pluto in the sense of kind of giving it a rebirth. We're kind of regurgitating this. We're kind of, moving on from one set of fear to another set of fear, as Pluto usually likes to do. And I just feel like, at bare minimum, we're going to feel a little bit more antsy. I feel a little bit more claustrophobic or anxious on Wednesday when the Sun's on Pluto. Everything's going to feel very extreme, right? Like, it's like, when you've been under the sun too long and you've been baking in heat too long, or you've dealt with too much stress and frustration, like sometimes it kind of just gets to you. And I feel like that's really the Sun Pluto day. So I don't want to say try to relax, but because there's no relaxing really. You got this moon doing all of this kind of crazy stuff here. So I just think on the Sun conjoining Pluto, just unclench your jaw, find a way to make it okay. We'll move on to another day eventually. And that's exactly what Thursday is, actually. Let's go to Thursday. The moon, again, will conjoin Mercury later Wednesday night, earlier into Wednesday morning. And I think, again, that's just moon conjoining Mercury. That's being, creative with finding solutions, creative and more stable ways of communicating something. I think the moon conjoining Mercury is like when it's like, okay, now all this information has happened. Let's process that information. Let's process that data. And right after the moon conjoins Mercury, basically the moon just goes void all day long. The moon's not really doing anything else. So it's kind of like we kind of have Thursday to just kind of take a breath, kind of think about everything. Because again, we're just starting to get to this Aquarius train of like everything in Aquarius. So we had a lot of new things that we're going to be going over here for the next little while. Like, it's super funny. Like in February, it's like all of these, and again, I'm going to be making my Mercury retrograde video this week. I think this is going to be a really positive Mercury retrograde. I don't think it's going to be bad at all. I think it's actually going to be really, really good. Because I just think it's going to allow us time to, a lot of shit is going to happen in the next couple weeks, and we need some time to go over that. Like it was too much, too fast, too soon. So, the moon goes void on Thursday. We kind of just have that day to, think about things and not, feel like rushed to do anything about it. But then we get into Friday, and that's when we're going to be having the moon ingress into Pisces. and make a small sextile to Uranus, but that's also when we're going to have Mercury enter shadow. So as the moon goes into Pisces, I'm like a broken record with this stuff. Like, it's just kind of that time to feel things out. You're going to be here. You're going to be there. You're going to be kind of exploring your emotions on a lot of topics. Just don't, there's with the moon in Pisces, there's no clear answers. Just it's a time to kind of like work things out in your head. But on Friday, we're going to be having Mercury enter shadow. So again, from January 15th all the way up until January 30th, this is when Mercury is setting the context of what the Mercury retrograde is going to be about. Then Mercury will retrograde on January 30th and then go direct sometime in the middle of February. And then, of course, we get out of shadow like later in March. So yeah, Mercury will come back to this point at like the middle of February, and Mercury won't even leave shadow until, which is like 26 degrees Aquarius, until March. So we've literally got about a month and a half of Mercury in Aquarius. Like, get comfortable and get used to Mercury in Aquarius. Get used to this way of communicating and speaking. But as Mercury enters shadow, this is where, and I also think just too in the political world, I think this Mercury retrograde is going to be a really big deal and a really big switch over. But yeah, Mercury enters retrograde. Pay attention to what's going on. What house is Mercury retrograding in? Pay attention to what's going on in that area if you're going to have any miscommunications, mishaps. And again, and this is something I'm going to talk much more about in my Mercury retrograde video. Why I think this Mercury retrograde is going to be good is this is going to be a time to review and to reflect and to just go over everything. Like, a lot of shit's about to happen in the next couple weeks. Like, it already kind of started. And then after that, it kind of chills out for a minute. I know, which is kind of crazy to say. Like, yeah, there's more turbulence in 2021, but for the most part, really January and February are like the really crazy parts of 2021. After that, it kind of chills out for a little bit. So this Mercury retrograde really gives us time to go like, okay, what was that? We need answers. We got questions. And I think it just starts again here on Friday, where that context of like, okay, you're going to be going over this again. This isn't the first time you're going to see this, so don't expect this to be a one and final, done thing. And then we get into Saturday. The moon is going to then conjoin Neptune and make a sextile to Venus before it does that. I think Saturday is looking great, especially to, I would say to party, but of course, there's only so many places where that's going on. But as the moon sextiles Venus, I think this is good for, I think finding creativity and finding, like, there's a saying that's like, free, like the most free man has like a system or a structure or a routine. And I feel like the moon in Pisces sextiling Venus and Capricorn is like, there's a certain freedom in like, not habits or like routines essentially, but like, there's freedom in discipline. There's freedom in hard work or effort. There's freedom in, a system, right? Like it, because when you're just fully free and just doing kind of everything, well, then there's no direction, which means, you don't have necessarily the freedom. I hope someone knows what I'm talking about. I wish I, knew it better, but I feel like that's a good way to explain the moon in Pisces, sextiling Venus and then conjoining Neptune. Getting in some type of system, having some type of regulation, having some type of just consistency, I think can bring a lot of potential to, your feelings, what you're doing. The moon's going to be in Pisces where we have room to feel things out. We have room to express things. I think this is also a good time to hash problems out, to really see what's going to work and what's not going to work. But Saturday's looking good in my opinion. Not a whole bad day, which, I'm also just lately I've just been trying to like mostly looking at the astrology, just like what days are good and what days are bad. Like what days are not going to be as fun. And Saturday definitely looks pretty fun for the most part. Then we get to Sunday, and Sunday is when Jupiter squares Uranus. And the moon will go into Aries later on that evening. So Jupiter square Uranus, again, this shouldn't, like, it's the same thing with everybody storming DC, like, as an astrologer, but also as just an American who was paying attention, that wasn't that surprising. This Jupiter-Uranus square, they're even talking about, something else going on down on the 17th. Don't be surprised. That's that Jupiter and Aquarius squaring Uranus shit. Like, there's going to be groups of people, there's going to be some type of ideological difference that is, shaking up some type of foundation, that's shaking up, where we can kind of center ourselves. So like that's just that square, and we're gonna keep seeing that for the next couple of weeks. I feel like I mean, we saw it with Mars going into Taurus, which was just so like it was just like clockwork, right? Mars goes into Aries, and literally it stopped. Well, I talked about this in the weekly horoscope. It was literally at like 3 a.m., which I even said in my horoscope at 3 a.m. when the moon went into Scorpios, when they officiated the votes, or authenticated the votes, or whatever the fuck. It's just like clockwork. It's just like clockwork. So I think with this Jupiter-Uranus square, for one, it's happening all week. Just because it's perfecting on Sunday doesn't mean you're not going to see it, It's the same thing, like, I try to explain to people, like, yes, that day is going to be very specific, but just look at the general theme. Same thing with, like, when Pluto went into Capricorn. Pluto went into Capricorn, like, a month after the great, recession. But anyway, Jupiter squaring Uranus, this... again, Jupiter has even more to do with idealism, or our ideals, and I think Jupiter in Aquarius squaring Uranus is there's friction, there's kind of explosive tension. Taurus and Aquarius, both signs that are very unmovable, fixed signs, right? An immovable object meets I don't think anyone replied to that comment. Because I tried to say the same thing last week. Hold on, I'm gonna look this up, because it's just bothering me that I don't remember it. An immovable object meets an unstoppable force. That's what it is. That's very much Uranus and Taurus squaring Jupiter and Aquarius. An immovable object meets an unstoppable force. And so there's going to be some colliding, but to kind of step away from the more political view, I think in a more personal view, don't be surprised when certain beliefs that you have, or certain ideals that you have, or a certain worldview you have changes. Because I think that's what's really going on here. It's Jupiter. We had this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, right? There's this whole new beginning with things. As it squares Uranus, there's something about our ideals, or there's something about our beliefs that isn't meshing with the new standard of what's going on right now. Again, everything in Aquarius squaring Uranus is like, we're trying to do all of this new stuff, and it's just, it's like trying to make, your old Windows computer from 2005 try to run Windows 10. Like, it won't work. You can't expect old computers to run on new systems. And that's not to say like an old dog can't learn new tricks. But I do think that when you try to do that stuff, like, let's say you are trying to download Windows 10 onto your old Windows computer. Sure, you might be able to do it, but it's not going to download like that. It's going to take a couple hours to download. It's going to probably also have some problems. So, Jupiter squaring Uranus. Don't expect, just because you feel like structured or you feel like your ideals are well thought out, that doesn't mean that you're not vulnerable to those changing. Like, with Jupiter and Aquarius, it's a fixed sign, right? We're always right. Everyone thinks that they're always right. And I think Jupiter squaring Uranus, there's going to be problems where, we go, is this right? Is this actually correct with how the new things are kind of going on? Is this the best way to go about things? And Uranus is in Taurus too. The way that our values are changing. Jupiter squaring Uranus. We're seeing things from a completely different perspective now. I think that's the most important thing. So another key element to this is, if we kind of rewind back here with this new moon in Capricorn on top, to kind of kick this week off, like, we're doing things differently. We're doing new things. And when we do new things, we're going to have new challenges. And, the one thing that this is the one thing that I kind of really want to hit on with everything being fixed signs is, like, we're going to be wrong. And we're going to literally, like, we're going to be all this stuff in Aquarius, right? We're looking at things from such a different perspective now that we can really see everything. When you see everything from a bird's eye view, it all kind of makes sense. One time, it's like I don't know if you guys have ever been to a football game, but football is the best sport I can think of for this, because I went to a football game once, and of course we had like the nosebleed seats because we're cheap. And you can't see shit, you know what I mean? But that when you're at home, when you're on the TV and you can watch that play-by-play and everything's zoomed in, that's the way I would kind of look at Jupiter and Aquarius. Like, we're at home, we're watching the game on TV. We're not just there. We could see the way it's playing out here. We could see the way it's playing out there. And that's going to change the way that we interact with it. That's going to change the way that we see things, right? And so I think this week, as we're trying to implement these newer things, trying to have more fun, like, don't be afraid to be wrong, and don't be afraid to open up your mind to different ideas, because Jupiter squaring Uranus at the very minimum is shaking up our ideals, is shaking up what we believe and what we think is right and what we think is wrong. Which, again, what's I think one of the most insane parts about this, insurrection thing is it's calling into question everything that Trump built up over these past few years. It's really, we're all asking ourselves these questions, or at least not we, but maybe the government is at this moment. And it's kind of interesting how it's all just leading up to here. But that's this week. This week is very, okay. There has some issues. Again, that Mars square Saturn. If your car is going to break down this week, if you've been ignoring it, things aren't going to move forward, and there's going to be a call for a lot of change that needs to take place. And it's the same way too. It's the same way when you watch so I was watching My 600-Pound Life, and God, that show is so difficult to watch sometimes because it's just so emotionally stoking. Because you have there's so much you have so much empathy, but then you also have so much you're doing it to yourself. And the reason I bring this up is you realize where you're wrong. It's the same thing with the Hoarder Show or the 600-Pound Life people, the people, or The Biggest Loser. In the moment when you're wrong, all you want to do is defend and deflect, right? Because that's what our brain trains us to do, unless you're very open in that moment to being wrong, which is, again, a very rare space. Not saying that it can't be done. But it takes some time to accept and acknowledge when you're wrong. It takes some time to let that out, and to kind of acceptance is the final stage, right? What's the first stage of denial? It's the first stage is denial. First stage, I don't even know what I'm talking about here. It's denial, something else, and then it all leads up to acceptance. And so anyway, this week you might butt heads with a lot of things, but just take that step back. This is about being an Aquarius, right? This is so much more than just watching how something works. It's about watching how the whole system operates. I always like to look at it as Aquarius is very much like economics. Economics, people think the economy and think the stock market, when economics is really just how do we take resources and goods and exchange them through people. It's such a complex system. It's not just this one tiny thing. It's a whole nuanced, arbitrary system that, is a huge driving force. It is the driving force really of our, of being a human, is our economies and how we trade with each other and how we interact with each other. And so, it's the same thing with economics. You don't just go, oh, this is the one way things work and that's it. It's no, well, you got to take a lot of things into consideration. And so I think with all this Aquarius stuff, take this time to take that step back and look at things differently, watch the play-by-play, look at things from the different perspective, and realize where a certain way that you might be looking at something might be wrong. And where can you, again, Jupiter squaring Uranus, it's kind of confrontive. It's kind of, it almost gives me the type of feeling of, what do they call those things for addicts? Interventions, that's the word I was looking for. Jupiter squaring Uranus is so intervention. Okay, look, we can't do this anymore. We got to change things now. Because Uranus really is, I can't recommend enough. I've talked about this book before. Prometheus the Awakener. It's a book by Richard Tarnas, and it's all about Uranus. And he talks about so much about Prometheus being the more correct mythology behind Uranus, and Prometheus being about, the person that steals the fire from the gods and liberates the people. There's a lot of, with Uranus, there's unexpected stuff, but it's also liberation. It's also that freedom. And so I think Jupiter squaring Uranus is don't be afraid to liberate yourself or to, shred what doesn't work anymore. Sometimes it takes, it's ripping off the Band-Aid, it's not, I hate ripping off Band-Aids. It ain't the funnest thing to do, but it's easier to just rip it off all at once than just slowly peel it away. And I feel with Jupiter squaring Uranus, this is definitely a time where some of our ideals, some of the way that we view the world might just kind of be like a Band-Aid that gets ripped off and might change. So expect a lot of that next week. Sun enters Aquarius, Mars conjoins Uranus, which, by the way, I don't know if you guys actually looked at the day that Mars conjoins Uranus, but it's a Moon Mars Uranus conjunction, and it's the day, I'm pretty sure, of the inauguration. I don't even remember what's exactly happening at the inauguration now because so much fucking shit's going on. the crazy Mars-Uranus conjunction, which is going to be horrible. Mars squares Jupiter next week too. The Sun will conjoin Saturn, which we didn't get the last time Saturn was in Aquarius. So this is truly the grand introduction of Saturn in Aquarius. And Venus sextiles Neptune, which isn't too bad. Again, it's this week and next week, and I think after that, we just got to get to next week. And then February's cleanup time. February is, let's kind of take a big breath and go over all of that before we move forward. And then we move on to the rest of 2021. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching, being here, liking, sharing, commenting, subscribing. I meant to say this earlier, but I said like a couple months ago I was going to change my prices, and I just never got to it. I'm actually doing that here in the next week or two. I have it all set up, but I'm raising my prices, but I'm also making my readings more available. Like I'm going to start doing 30-minute sessions. So like, in case you can't afford like a full hour session, you can still get a 30-minute session with me. That'll be even cheaper than a reading that you can get with me right now. So you'll see it once it's all done. I just got to get it set up, but that's just something I wanted to give you guys a heads up on, because that's going to be a pretty big change. So like, I'm not going to be doing my Jupiter consults anymore, or even like the follow-up type thing. It's all going to change. So if you've been interested in any of my readings, make sure you go check them out. All that's going to change in the next couple weeks. And I think that's all I got for you guys. So with that being said, I'll be seeing you next week.